Well, good evening and welcome to our first official OCPS virtual financial aid night. My name is Nicole Gurley and I'm an OCPS transition counselor. If you marked on your Google form that you'd prefer the presentation in Portuguese or Haitian Creole, please check your email to find a translation of our presentation. This presentation will be recorded and posted on your district YouTube channel, as well as at your schools. So please keep your mics muted. I'm very excited to present our speaker tonight because I believe him to be the best of the best. Years ago when I met him before he started working at Valencia, I couldn't believe his enthusiasm and commitment to helping our schools and community understand the financial aid process. He truly cares about each one of you and he wants to make sure you make the best financial aid decisions possible. So without further ado, I welcome Daniel Barkowitz, Assistant Vice President, Financial Aid and Veterans Affairs at Valencia College.
Nicole, thank you so much. I really appreciate the invitation and I appreciate the opportunity to present to all of you. I know some of you are having struggles with the audio. And basically my telling you this is really not going to work. So, because you're having struggles with audio. So if someone, thank you. If you all can help on the chat, that's perfect. So thank you for the opportunity to present with you all virtually. I much prefer to do this in person, and I'm sure you would too. So tonight's going to be a little interesting because usually we are in person when we do these presentations, but we will figure it out together. And let me offer you a couple of options tonight. First of all, ask questions this evening. Feel free to type them in the chat. We will try to respond to questions as we go along. I also commit that if you stay with us to the end, I will give you my email address, and I offer this every presentation I do. You will have a direct way to be in touch with me. So if you have questions after our session tonight and you want to get more information about a particular personal circumstance, you can feel free to reach me via your email as well. And I commit that I will respond to you and get you an answer. Email is always the best way to be in touch with me. So with that, let's go ahead and step into the presentation. So what are we going to cover tonight? So tonight, we are going to talk about a number of things. We're going to talk about, let me see if I can get this moving on. There we go. To talk about, number one, what is financial aid? So you learn about what the particular definition is that we use. What are the sources of financial aid? How do we determine what you're eligible for? And then when and how do you apply for financial aid? So let me again begin by giving you a little bit of an introduction to who I am. So my name is Daniel Barkowitz, and I have about 30 years of financial aid experience working at lots of different colleges, from public colleges to private colleges, from undergraduate to graduate schools, small and large schools. So some of the schools that I've worked at, you'll see now pop up on your screen. So I was assistant director of financial aid at Boston College. I was director of financial aid at MIT in Cambridge. I was dean of financial aid at Columbia University. And so I've been in Florida for about 5 years and have worked at Valencia now for about 3. So I'm really happy. Great place. Valencia is a phenomenal place. But you'll hear tonight, first of all, you'll hear my dogs. So I apologize. Hold on. This is the story of living and working at home, is you're never quite sure who's going to interrupt you. So you'll hear tonight, I'll talk about the particulars of the system for all kinds of schools, regardless of whether you're looking at a state school, a community college, an elite private institution. You'll hear and learn about the financial aid system for all types of institutions. So just to assure you that we're going to talk about all of that, and I have experience with all of that. So if you have questions, particularly about a particular school, I'm happy to talk to you about that as well, or connect you with someone at that school who can help you. So with that, I'm curious to know a little bit about all of you. So if you can, in the chat, If you're a student, where are you thinking about going to college? Or if you're a parent, what are some of the names of the schools that you all are thinking of? So I see UCF, NYU, Mid-Florida, Flagler, MIT, UMass, Stanford, Valencia. Awesome. I see Valencia in there. USF. Great. Wonderful. Good. So a lot of variation for a lot of different kinds of schools. Here's the next question. How much does that cost? So do you have any ideas of what the cost of those institutions are? A lot. It's a good answer. A lot. 32,000. Lots of dollar signs. 38,000. Yep. So tonight we're going to look at those answers and get you some answers about what the costs truly are.
See, I don't think it's going to be financial planning. I think it's just going to be.
It's financial aid. Listen.
Yep, sorry. Stephanie, if you can mute your audio, that would be great. Number 3, how are you going to pay for it, right? So tonight's goal is to talk about the how are you going to pay for it answer. We're going to tonight walk through the paying for it part of the conversation. And so to next, I want to begin talking about the how do you pay for it by looking at a quick overview. So there is some good news. And by the way, you'll see tonight as we go through the presentation, a couple of things, and you'll be able to link back to this presentation later. You'll see on several of the slides on the bottom, a link to something that says Moneyman Blog. And I want to tell you what Moneyman Blog is. Moneyman Blog is a blog that I keep on financial aid in general. Again, it's not specifically about Valencia College. It's about financial aid in general. And where there is a topic that I have written about, I actually, on the blog, I link to it in the presentation. So you can read more about all of these topics by going to the blog. So, sorry, sweetie, yes, I know, you want to play. So the first one I want to point you to is the College Board Trends Report. This is an annual report the College Board produces on financial aid. And this is based on the 2019 report. It's the last report that we have information on. And what you'll see is that over $186 billion was given out in undergraduate financial aid in 2018-19. That's the good news, right? And you can see if you look at the chart, and I'll look at it with you, that there's lots of money in the system. Some not so good news, and that is how it's made up. So let's walk through it together. Right, as we look through, you'll see a lot of this money is loan money. So how much of what you're looking at here is loans, right? Federal student loans make up about 21% of the funds that are available to students. It's about $41 billion. Federal parent loans are another $12 billion, or about 7%. So about 8% of the money that's out there is in the form of student and parent loans. That's the bad news. You'll also see non-federal loans, another 6%. But what's the good news? The good news is look at all the different sources of grants. Federal grants at 15%, or about $29 billion. Institutional grants, private schools and schools like Valencia and UCF offer a number of their own scholarships to help students afford their costs. State grants like Bright Futures, $12 billion nationwide. So lots of money out there. Tonight, we're going to talk about all of these and all of the ways that you can access these types of financial assistance. There are a couple pieces you want to remember, right? Basically, the way the system works is it works so that there's a concept called vertical and horizontal equity, that basically families in the same financial circumstances should be able to afford the same amount for college, those in different circumstances, different amounts. So the way that translates, or what that really means, is if you and I have the same income, the same number of people in our household, the same number of people in college, everything about us is the same, we should be able to afford the same amount for college. If something about us is different, then our contribution should be different. And the way the system is designed to work, we look at all of that information as we make decisions about how much you can pay for college. And we're going to talk about that system tonight so you can learn a little more about it. In addition, it's important to know that the way our system, the financial aid system, is designed, you, parents and students, we're going to ask you to contribute first. Once you've given what you can and what you're able to, then there are lots of parties that will come in to help you. The federal government, the state government, your institution, private foundations, lots of other places that will come and help you pay the rest of it, but you're going to be asked to pay what you can, in most cases, first. And also, this is a manageable process. I know it can feel overwhelming, and you're doing the right thing by being here with us tonight because you're early in the cycle, especially for those of you that are seniors. This is the right time to be looking at this conversation because the cycle begins really October 1. So you're exactly where you need to be time-wise. So I guess the question to ask is it worth it, right? A number of years ago, we didn't have to have this conversation. People just assumed that college was worth the expense. But when you're talking about a $70,000 expense for 1 year, over 4 years, you have to ask the question, is it worth it, right? Is it worth paying that amount of money? And so I have a couple of slides to sort of talk about the is it worth it question. This one is a nationwide slide. Now, keep in mind, this is from 2019. Everything changed because of COVID, right? So we're all living through the world we're living in now. And 2020 is just an interesting year for lots of different reasons. But you will see, if you look here, that this is based on 2019. In 2019, the unemployment rate was about 3% nationwide. And what you'll see in the blue is that the less education you had, the higher your chance was of being unemployed. Or to translate that, the more education you had, the better chance you had of being employed. And on the right side in the green is annual, or actually weekly earnings. So you can see the same thing. The higher you go up the educational ladder, the more you earn. So even just graduating from high school moves you from $592 a week to $746 a week nationwide. And you can see over time how much just even having a bachelor's degree essentially doubles your income. And you can go higher with a master's degree, et cetera. So that's nationwide. But what about Orange County, specifically Orange County? What do we know about Orange County? So these data come from the Florida College Access Network, and it shows you that Orange County is doing better and better in terms of college attainment, degree attainment. We're not quite yet at the Florida average in Orange County, but we're doing really well. And you can also see, and this is stunning, the wages for local workers by education level. So again, in Orange County, getting your associate's degree, just your associate's degree, doubles the earnings from your high school diploma to your associate's degree. Your bachelor's degree gives you to $73,000 annually, master's $109,000 or higher. And you'll see that the fastest growing jobs in Florida are those that require education beyond high school. So it is worth it. There is an investment here, but it certainly is worth it. So let's see. I see a note that you've lost me on video. Am I back, Nicole?
You've been back. I didn't lose you.
Okay. Okay, so going on, there's some basic vocabulary I want to review with you tonight, and those are these three terms. And this is important as we start talking about financial aid. And those terms are COA, EFC, and need. So let me define what they are. COA is cost of attendance, right? When I asked you how much a year costs at one of the schools you're looking at, a number of you typed in lots of different answers. Chances are you probably weren't writing down how much tuition was. You were writing down total cost, right? No school is going to charge you $75,000 for tuition. That just doesn't happen, right? But there are schools that the total cost is $75,000, and that includes tuition, room and board, books, supplies, all of the expenses you need for a year. There are lots of schools that cost much less than $75,000. So again, the range, and we'll look at the range in a moment, the range is wide. But cost of attendance is important because it's a measure of your whole cost. It's not what you're going to pay out of pocket to the school, but it's a measure of the whole cost for the year. And it's a term that we use. It's an important term to know when you talk to your colleges. Number two, the second piece is your expected family contribution. So when you apply for financial aid, we're going to determine how much we expect family to be able to contribute in the course of a year. That's a number that comes from your application. So we're going to run your numbers through a formula. We'll talk a little more about that formula tonight. And what comes out of that is your expected family contribution, how much you can afford to pay for college. That'll be a number from 0 to 99,000 based on your individual circumstances. The difference between that is your need. It's how much you need to help pay for school. So let's look at a couple of ways that this works out. So the first chart I'm going to show you is I just picked a couple of schools to show you what their costs of attendance are. So some of you named Valencia, UCF, University of Florida, maybe Stetson or Emory or MIT or Harvard. What are their costs of attendance for 2020 and 21, this year? So starting from the right side, you'll see that Harvard is up to about $76,000 a year, right? Again, is anyone paying $76,000 a year to attend Harvard? Not really. Some people are, but the majority of students attending Harvard are getting significant financial aid to help them pay. You can see MIT, Emory, Stetson, but then you start to see things breaking apart. Why are there 4 lines on some of these other institutions? Many institutions have different costs if you live on campus versus living at home. So for example, if we look at UF for a moment, University of Florida, you'll see 4 lines here, right? The purple line is if you live on or off campus. The darker blue line is if you live at home. So you can save about $10,000 a year just living at home, or at least they're estimating it will save you that in room and board. What are these top 2 lines? This is how much it costs if you're coming to a Florida school from out of state. So this is the out of state cost. Keep in mind, especially if you're looking at a state school in some place like Georgia or Alabama, maybe you want to go to UA, for example, right? You will likely pay out of state tuition. In Florida, that can be substantial. So the difference between in-state and out-of-state is a way that the state already gives you a subsidy. So if you attend UF, you're already saving $22,000 a year because you live in the state of Florida. And for in-state residents, you need to be in Florida for at least a year before you start college. And we can talk more about residence, and you're going to have to prove your Florida residence to qualify for in-state tuition at your college. That'll be a process that they'll walk you through. But you can see here, that the range of cost is all over the map. And keep in mind, this is total cost. So, for example, at Valencia, you might say those numbers seem rather high. Well, the reality is at Valencia, our tuition is only $100 a credit hour. So you can go full-time to Valencia all year and only spend $3,000. Right? So why is this number so much higher? Because that includes the costs we're estimating for you in terms of transportation and paying for rent and miscellaneous charges, all of those sorts of pieces. And you can learn more about this, again, on my blog, or you can look at colleges. They'll publish their costs of attendance for you as well. So once you've selected some colleges, how does this actually work? Right? So let's say you apply colleges, and it goes through, and the first college costs $70,000 a year, the second one $50,000 a year, the third one $30,000 a year, the fourth one $20,000, the fifth one $10,000. And you go through the application process, and it comes out that you can afford about $10,000 a year. That's what it's determined is your EFC. Right? The way the system is designed to work, you should pay $10,000 regardless of which college you go to. Because If all you can afford is a $10,000 EFC, that's all you can afford. But what do we know about the money that's in this yellow? What we know about the money that's in that yellow figure, or that yellow part of the slide, is that some of that, about 30% of it, is going to be in the form of loans. So keep in mind that even if it's not coming from your pocket directly out of pocket, right, then it's it is something that you may have to pay back at some point. At the $70,000 school, a lot more of that money is going to be grant. It's going to be a limited amount of loans. Probably at College D, it would be all loans that you would qualify for, or majority loans. But you'll get a lot more grant at College A. So long story short, you really want to make sure that you apply to schools regardless of their cost. Don't rule out a school just because you think it costs a lot. Your contribution is your contribution. And financial aid is here to help make the difference for you between what you can afford and what the school costs. And one way of saying this, or another way of looking at this, is this, right? The cost of attendance is really what the sticker price is, right? And financial aid is going to help you come up with a way to get a discount. The net price is what you're most interested in. What are you going to pay out of pocket, right? So the analogy I like to use is, let's say all of us went to Best Buy tomorrow, or went to Walmart or whatever, and we all decided we're going to buy a brand new color TV. And we're all going to buy the same brand TV. All of us, unless we had a coupon, basically, all of us would pay the same amount for that television, right? No one would get the TV for free, and probably no one's going to pay full price, but essentially we'd all pay roughly the same amount. If we all went to the same college, though, each of us would have a different contribution. Sorry, hold on. Quiet. If we all went to the same college, each of us would have a different contribution amount. So each of us would pay a different amount of money, right? So one of the things about financial aid is that, again, each one of us is going to have a different net price. So the only way to know really is to go through the financial aid process to actually determine what your contribution or your total amount is going to be. So there's a couple of other things we wanted to look at, right? And that is the 3 different types of funds that make up your financial aid award. Number 1, grants or scholarships. That's the best kind of money. That's the best money you want to qualify for. That's money you don't have to pay back. Loans is the second type. And a lot of people think that loans are negative. Loans are not necessarily negative. You want to make sure you don't borrow too much. And I'll talk a little bit more about how you determine that in a moment. But loans are going to be an investment in your future. They're student loans and parent loans, right? And then the third type is work. So let's talk about work for a moment. I'm going to start there. Often you will qualify in your financial aid award for a work contribution. Now, this is a little strange in the world of COVID, but again, hopefully, we'll have a vaccine, things will return to normal, and you can find a job on campus. In fact, some colleges are offering jobs on campus right now where you can work remotely and still get paid in a work-study job. Why would you want a work-study job? First of all, what's the benefit of having a work-study job? So I'll give you an example. I have 2 daughters, one of whom is graduated now. She went to Sarah Lawrence and then Columbia, and is now graduated, living in Orlando, working at Disney. The other daughter is actually attending Stetson currently. My student at Stetson has a couple of jobs, right? The benefit of those jobs are, A, she gets paid from the school, so she can use that money to help her offset her expenses. I don't have to give her an allowance. B, because they're work-study jobs, when she is on campus, she doesn't have to go very far. The job is right there. I'm sure many of you students actually have jobs right now in high school, but often those jobs will have minimum shifts. You have to work at least 4 hours or 3 hours. Lots of work-study jobs, you can come and go based on the schedule of the office, and you can learn a lot about how the college works. One of the best work-study jobs is in the financial aid office. We pay students to help us process financial aid. You can learn a lot about how the system works. I want to talk about loans for a second. So again, lots of people are scared about loans, and there's lots of negative press about student loans. In fact, you can read that student loans are larger than credit cards. There's $3 billion or $3 trillion that people owe in student loans. I'm not going to play that down. Student loans are not something you want to overindulge in. However, all of you are going to likely need to borrow a small student loan. How do you determine how much of a student loan is too much? The best way to do that as a student, and this is now I'm speaking directly to those high school students or college students who are on the phone or on the line with me, is you want to look at what your starting salary is going to be when you graduate from your program. So let's say you're in a program and your desire is to be an elementary school educator. And I'm going to make these numbers up, but let's say you figure out that when you graduate, you're going to earn $23,000 a year as an elementary school educator. You do not want to borrow more than your starting salary, more than $23,000 in total loans. Because if you do, chances are you're going to have difficulty paying them back. Now, there are lots of ways that they make it easier for you. There are payment options, but in general, you don't want to have more in debt than your average starting salary. Let's say you're going to be an engineering student instead, and you figure that engineering students graduate with about a $40,000 a year starting salary. Does that mean you can borrow up to $40,000? Sure. Does that mean you should? No. If you can keep your loans lower, you're better off. Right? So again, you want to manage carefully the amount of loan you borrow. And we'll talk about some strategies. And in fact, let me give you one of them now. So when we talk about cost of attendance, remember we talked about room and board and other pieces. You have control over some elements of your cost of attendance. For example, right, lots of schools have lots of different kinds of dorm rooms. You might have a choice between a single, a double, a triple. Obviously, the ones that are triples are going to be less expensive, or the ones that aren't in the newer dorm are going to be less expensive. You want to try to save money while you're in school by choosing the less expensive options. Books. I'll tell you, so with my daughter who's at Stetson, we have paid for a family Amazon Prime subscription. Where is generally the most expensive place to buy your books? The bookstore. So she does not buy her books at the bookstore. She buys them from Amazon, right? She finds the discount, she finds a used book if she can, and it's shipped to her. So, again, you have options in terms of how you decide to manage your budget, and you want to be careful in terms of how you manage it so you can borrow less over time. The more careful you are with your cost of attendance, the less money ultimately you're going to need to borrow. Okay, let's go on. So we're going to talk about some applications. So I'm going to choose, let's see, is there a student who's willing to type hello in the chat for me? A current high school senior. BG Cox, great. Hi, BG Cox, I saw you first. So can I ask you, BG Cox is the name you have listed here. Can you type in for us, what are the schools, BG, that you are thinking of applying to? Just type in a list of some of those schools. And actually, BG, if you want to unmute yourself, you could do that too, and we can talk to each other.
Hi there.
Hey.
So my name's Emily. I go to Freedom
Hi,
High
Emily.
School. My top schools right now are UF, UCF, FSU, and UNF.
Perfect. Okay. I'm going to add 2 other colleges to this example, if you don't mind, Emily. So pick a private school that you might think about applying to, private college.
Stetson.
Great. Awesome. And then we're going to pick one more. I'm going to throw Valencia in there just because. Does that work for you, Emily?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, awesome. So Emily, I have a question for you. We've named 6 schools. How many financial aid applications do you have to complete?
Would you have to complete one for each school or just one in total?
So good question. What do you think? So let's see if people can guess. So in the chat, how many financial applications do you think Emily and her family are going to have to complete? I see 1. I see 6. So far, all of you are wrong. So that's okay. We're going to talk about what the 0. Melina says 0. That is definitely the wrong answer. So we're going to talk about what the right answer is right now. And we're going to go, hopefully not 12. No, but we're going to talk about all of the answers together. So let's look at this together. So there are a couple of different forms we're going to talk about, Emily. So I appreciate you staying on with me. So the first one is the FAFSA. So let's talk about the FAFSA. Probably you've heard about the FAFSA. All of you know that word. What does it stand for? It stands for the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Hey, Emily, is it free to use the FAFSA?
Yes, I hope so.
It is. You do not have to pay to fill out the FAFSA. Are we all paying for it? Yes, we all pay for it in our taxes, but you do not pay to fill out the FAFSA. Never pay someone to do your FAFSA, right? FAFSA is free. You can do it online. You can also download an app on your iPhone or Android or phone, whatever phone you have, smartphone. You can download what's called the My Student Aid app. Claudia, let's see, we're gonna mute you. Thank you. So if you, let's see, Nicole, if you can help me mute Claudia, that would be great.
I'm trying to find her. Yeah.
Thank you. So, so the FAFSA, you would list all of your colleges. So if you're Emily, you're going to list all 6 colleges on your FAFSA. You're going to do that 1 time per year. And there's a question about the FAFSA. I'll come back to that question. Well, let's answer it now. If you're a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen, and eligible non-citizens include people with green cards, people who are here as asylees or parolees, they can fill out the FAFSA as well. If you're not a documented citizen, then you cannot, or eligible non-citizen, you cannot. But you don't have to be a U.S. citizen just to do the FAFSA. You can do it if you're an eligible non-citizen as well. You can update the FAFSA if you do it the first time. And we'll talk about parent or student in a moment. Asylee seekers, it's going to depend on your status, so we should take that offline. Emily, do you have any siblings, by the way?
I do. I have a younger brother.
How much younger?
He is in 8th grade.
Okay, so the 2 of you will never be in college together.
That is correct.
At least your parents hope the 2 of you will never be in college together at the same time.
Yes.
So, yeah. So the answer is if you have a sibling in college, then both of you do a FAFSA, right? It's 1 per year per student. So, it could be the situation that your family would be doing multiple FAFSAs in a year. In your case, not. So you're going to fill out 1 FAFSA. You're going to list all 6 colleges on that form. Okay, and it is free. It's at FAFSA.gov. You can start on October 1. So with all of the applications I'm going to talk about generally, they start on October 1. And you need to do it October 1 of your senior year. So if you're a junior right now, you can't do it until October 1 of your senior year. We'll talk about who the parents are. So a lot of you have conversations. I'm seeing these questions as they come in. We're going to talk about who your parent is in a moment, right? But for the moment, just know that it does need to be submitted by the student. And we'll talk about who requires parental information. You can list up to 12 colleges on the application. If you need to do more than 12, there's a workaround and we can talk about it. And yes, you want to put all of the colleges nationwide that you're applying to on the FAFSA. This is 1 application for the whole system. Okay, what's the second type of application? So Emily, we know, has to do 1 FAFSA. There's another type of application called the profile. It's called the CSS Financial Aid Profile, right? This is particularly for colleges that are private schools that have a lot of their own money to give away. Some colleges need this form, not all. I know Stetson does. Stetson suggests that you fill it out. None of the state schools will require this, but schools like MIT, NYU, some of the schools that you listed may require the profile. If you're not sure, you can click on the link or look up the word college financial aid profile on Google, and you can find a list of all the colleges that require the profile. Generally, it's going to be colleges that have a lot of their own money to give away. So if they're an expensive school with a lot of money of their own to give away, they'll require the profile. It is a paid form. You do have to pay to use it. So profile is a little different than FAFSA. You pay by school, so you only want to fill it out for the schools that you're applying to that require it. Especially if you're doing early decision, some colleges who do early decision will ask you to do the CSS profile as well. There were some questions about international schools. If your international school does provide federal financial aid, and you have to ask them, then they will also take the FAFSA. So again, going back to the FAFSA, if your international college like King's College or McGill in Canada provide federal financial aid, U.S. federal financial aid, you'll have to ask that school, do they take the FAFSA? And the profile, as Nicole answered in chat, the profile is only for some colleges, and it's primarily for their own money. Because if they have a lot of their own money to give, they want that application form. So far, Emily, we've got you doing one FAFSA, one profile. The third type of application is the institutional application. So chances are your colleges may have their own institutional financial aid application as well. So for example, I know at Valencia, we have a foundation scholarship application where you can apply to a whole bunch of different scholarships through our foundation at Valencia. UCF has something similar. So different colleges may have their own financial aid application, and if they do, you want to make sure to apply with them as well. So far we've got one FAFSA, one profile, and up to 6 college applications. So we are at 8 applications, Emily. Hey, Emily, are you done?
Probably not.
Probably not. Good guess. Good guess. Before we move to the next slide, right, just answering a couple of questions. FAFSA due dates are set by institutions. So institutions will tell you when their deadlines are, and we'll answer that and talk about deadlines in a moment. So every school does have a priority deadline. Thank you, Nicole, for answering these questions. I appreciate it. That they suggest you get it done. But looking on, where's my friend Pete Hernandez, who I know is on the call? So Pete is with us from OSPA. OSPA is the Office of Student Financial Assistance for the state of Florida. Now, the state of Florida has its own financial aid application, right, Pete?
That is correct.
Yeah.
We do have one.
Yeah, and do you want to talk about, I'll give you a moment. Do you want to mention, this is what I've got in terms of Florida. Do you want to say anything about the Florida application? Everyone knows about Bright Futures, but they forget that there are 11 other programs that the state of Florida offers beyond simply Bright Futures.
Absolutely. And if you allow me a minute, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Yes, when it comes to applying to the state scholarships and grants, we do award more than $100 million in state scholarships and grants throughout the state of Florida. By submitting this one application, which is normally found at the website Florida Student Financial Aid SG.org, it is considered the Bright Futures application. It is mandated to receive the Florida Bright Futures application. But with that one application that also opens up on October 1st, and in conjunction with submitting the FAFSA application, you will be considered for federal funds, state funds, and institutional funds. And that ultimately makes your financial aid package so much better. So that is why we highly, highly consider is filling out the Florida Financial Aid application, which is found on this website. It is mandated for the Florida Bright Future Scholarship, but in conjunction, it will also help you be evaluated for federal funds, state funds, institutional funds, which are both need-based, institutional-based, and state-based. Now, we highly recommend this application also opens up on October 1st, and we encourage all high school seniors to submit this application. It takes less than 5 to 7 minutes to complete. If you're a student that is thinking about going out of state, you have, by meeting all the criteria, including submitting this one application, you will then have the ability within the next 5 years to come back to the state of Florida and reinstate that Bright Futures application. Because if you do not, you will lose out on that opportunity. So we highly encourage all high school seniors, no matter what status they're in, if the student does not have a social security number, does not wish to provide it, you can still submit the application and we can utilize a pseudo number, but it is part of meeting the requirements. So we always advise all high school seniors to submit this application.
And just to be clear, you should even do it if you don't have the SAT scores yet, you don't have your community service hours yet. Go ahead and fill out the application now so you get it done, and the rest of it will connect. So that will connect through the cycle. So again, I know with what's going on with COVID, things are a little weird around testing, around community service hours. Go ahead, every one of you needs to do this application. Good news is you only do it once. You don't have to do it every year, unlike all the other applications we've talked about. So again, you want to make sure that you get this done. And thank you, Pete. And I know Pete will be around through the rest of the presentation as well. So moving on then, as we wrap up for Emily. So Emily, we have one FAFSA, one profile, 6 college applications potentially, and 1 Florida financial aid application. So your total number is 9. So if any of you guess 9, you win, but I don't think any of you guess 9. So the answer is that's how it works for Emily and her family. Again, the answer is, remember, this is an annual process. So you want to make sure every year that you're doing this. And Nicole brings up a really good point. This financial aid application, the Florida financial aid application, or sometimes referred to as the FFAA, most of you will do it in a class with your school counselors. And again, it's a really simple application. It'll take you 5 to 7 minutes. But you want to make sure that you get that done. Check with your school. Some of you in your English class or American Studies class or history class will get it done. Okay, so how do you sign your application? So again, in this world of COVID and where everything is online, how are you going to actually complete a signature? Right? Nicole wants to know how we got to 9 applications again. I'll just repeat that. 1 FAFSA, 1 profile, 6 institutional applications, and the state of Florida application. That's 9. Of the 9 forms that you need to complete, only 1 has a cost. And remember, it's 9 for Emily. It'll be different for you, but it's a potential of 9 for Emily. So it's based on the number of schools you're applying to. Okay, so let's talk about the FSA ID. So how do you sign these applications? Because you're doing this online, right? You're not going to take a pen and sign your computer screen. So how do you actually sign for an application? Well, the system, the federal government uses a system called the FSA ID, Federal Student Aid ID. And this is used for all federal student aid websites. One FSA ID is going to be required for a student, and a different FSA ID is going to be required for a parent. So it's like a signature, right? Parent's going to sign a form, student's going to sign a form. So what you want to do is register for an FSA ID now. You don't have to wait till October 1st. You can do this tonight or tomorrow. In fact, for many families, this is the most complicated part of the FAFSA, is just getting their FSA ID. So student will need one and a parent will need one. You need to use 2 different email addresses. You don't need to have both parents get an FSA ID. Only one of them needs to sign the application, but you do need one for a parent and one for a student. And you can set it up at this website, fsaid.ed, social.gov. When you sign up for it, you're going to need to have your social security number, your date of birth. They'll ask you to set up some reminder questions, a cell phone number in case you want to have it texted to you in case you forget your password, which I highly recommend. And again, it will confirm your citizenship, your information, and all of that. SSN, Social Security number, is required for this process because we have to confirm your identity with the Social Security Administration. And if you already have an FSA ID, once you have it, you can use it forever. So for example, if you're a student who has an FSA ID and you become a parent, you can use it. So you don't have to set up a new one, but you will need that as you go forward. So this is my big joke, by the way. Usually when we're in person, this gets a lot of laugh. So I hope that, if you feel it's funny, you can actually type LOL in the chat for me. Here's my joke. It's not a parent who's a parent. Okay, none of you are laughing, so clearly it doesn't work as well online. So what do I mean by that? Thank you very much. What I'm going to talk about is, yes.
I have a question.
Yep.
So my brother and my sister already graduated, and my dad already did the FSA ID. So can he use that for me too?
Yes. Yep, he can use the same FSA ID, Iman, once he has it. Absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
But you'll have to set one up for yourself.
All right.
So let's talk about parents, right? So you may think you know who a parent is, but FAFSA has a unique definition of what is a parent. So I want to talk about that now. So some of you started asking questions about this, right? For the FAFSA, what's important is where the student lives, right? So where the student lives becomes the parent for the purpose of the FAFSA. So let's take an example. Let's say I'm a parent and I'm separated or divorced from my wife and the student lives with me. My household becomes the household for the purpose of the FAFSA. So on the FAFSA, it's going to ask about parent 1 and parent 2. Notice it doesn't say mom and dad, right? Because in some families, there are 2 moms, in some families 2 dads, in some families a mom and a dad, in some families only a mom. So in those situations, right, it's only parent 1 and parent 2. If my wife and I were divorced and the student lived with me, I would be parent 1 and there would be no parent 2. It would just be my custodial household if we're divorced. Right? If the student spends half the time with both, half with me, half with mom, and literally it's half. So half with me, half with the other parent. Then the question becomes, who provides more financial support to the student? So when you decide who it is that's a parent for the purpose of the FAFSA, and if you're in a divorced or separated situation, it's going to be either who the student lives with first. If it's even, then it's going to be who provides more financial support. If it's me and I'm remarried, so let's say student lives with me, right? And then I'm remarried, so it's dad and stepmom. Stepmom is also going to be listed on the FAFSA. She would be parent 2, because in that situation, it is the custodial household. It's who the student lives with. That would include any step siblings living with us. So it's all about that. I want to dispel a myth, right? J.M. Flores says, I heard it has to do with who claims you on the taxes. Is that correct? No, it is not, right? It's all about who is the custodial household. If you live on your own and you're a student, you don't live with either parent, then it's going to be who did you live with last, basically, right? If your parents were never married, but you live with both of them, it is going to be both of them in that household. If your parents never married and you're living with one of them, it's only going to be the one you live with. So to answer some of the other questions that I'm seeing, right? We haven't gotten to tax forms yet, so give me a second on that. But basically, when it comes to income, you're going to put your income in for both of those parents. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Okay, so just moving on, what about for non-custodial parents? Right? For non-custodial parents, some colleges will require information from that other parent. mostly private schools and only on the profile. FAFSA never asks about the other parent that you're not living with, but some private colleges may for their financial aid. We're going to look at this question about dependent versus independent. We'll come back to that in a moment. So hold that. So what if you don't live with your parents? You don't see your parents? You don't have contact with your parents? We'll come back to that in a question in a second. So what information are you using, right? What year's income are you going to be reporting? So all of you who are high school seniors are looking at, and yes, we will have questions at the end. So if you'll save your questions, we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. For all of you attending for 21-22 for college, right, because that's the application cycle that you're coming into, the FAFSA is going to go live in a couple of weeks, October 1. You're going to be reporting information based on the 2019 tax year. Okay, why is that? Well, as of October 1, when the FAFSA goes live, that will be the last completed tax year you have records of. So that's going to be the year you report on. And that's true all year. You'll be reporting on 2019 income, right? And you'll report your assets and family information as of the day you file the form. So if we look at this arrow on the bottom, it's going to be the income you earned from January to December of 2019. You fill out your tax return usually in April. Because of the delay, it was July, where your taxes were due, July of 2020. You start your FAFSA in October, and the school year doesn't start until August of 2021. So it's almost 2 years from when you actually earned that income in some cases. What happens if your income is dramatically different? So let's say someone lost a job in 2020 because of the pandemic. What happens in those situations? So here's a situation where I would highly suggest you read this link that I've clicked to. And in fact, I'm going to actually open this link to show you the information that I've listed here, right? And this particularly is an element of, or an entry on what we're going to, sorry, hold on one second. On my blog, which is particularly about what to expect when it's unexpected. So let's do it this way. I'll get there a different way. Sorry, having a problem. This entry is all about what we call professional judgment. Professional judgment is the ability that a college has when your income is different to actually do, and you'll see the same error here, to do a review based on your new income information. So again, you'll see lots of text here, but it's good information, more than we can talk about tonight. And I link to a couple of schools that have examples of their professional judgment routines. So, there is an opportunity if you are in a situation where there's something unexpected that happens, where a college can help you. So I would absolutely suggest that if you lost your job, right, or you're in a situation where something different has happened, that you take a look at this post and you look at what's called a professional judgment, or a PJ. But when you fill out your FAFSA, you have to put the 2019 income information. It's up to the college to update that if they agree with you that there's a need to. So how does your information get to the FAFSA? For most of you, you're going to use something called the IRS data retrieval tool. This is really important. When you fill out your FAFSA, there's an opportunity for you to link your FAFSA data with your IRS data. Highly suggest you do that, because that way you can automatically transfer over all your tax information without you having to type it in, right? So in that situation, if you file US taxes, all the information will directly carry over. You can enter it by hand, but that increases your chances of being selected for something called verification. And I want to talk about verification in a moment. But before we do, when you go through and fill out your tax information on the FAFSA, you'll be presented with an option again to link it. And my suggestion is for both students and parents, if you have a tax record, link up your tax information. What is verification? about 35% of students nationwide are selected for verification, right? Verification is where we have to prove that what you submitted on the FAFSA is true. And to do that, the college is told we can collect copies of your tax forms if you haven't used that data retrieval tool. We can collect a copy of what's called a verification form, and we may ask you to prove your identity by providing a copy of a driver's license or a passport or proof of your high school graduation. So again, your chances of being selected to be verified are lowered if you use that data retrieval tool. And I've got lots of information here about what verification is and how it works, again, on the blog. So you can feel free to read more about verification if you go to the blog. And we talk about what documentation you should have when you fill out the FAFSA, all of that information. Okay, so I just want to talk for a moment. We've talked about need-based financial aid. I just want to mention merit-based financial aid as well. In Florida, what we know is that the Bright Futures is not based on need, it's based on merit, right? It's based on your SAT score or your ACT score, your GPA, your community service hours, right? It's not based on anything to do with how much you need. But most financial aid system-wide is based on need, right? What I also want to mention is this concept, and we won't spend a lot of time here, but it's worth you knowing, this concept called merit within need. And here's what I want you, and I want to advise you to be a smart shopper. So I'm going to give you this analogy, and we're going to look at this together. So what I want you to think about is that when you apply for admissions to a college, every college is going to rank you. They're going to look at you and they're going to determine how desirable are you for that college? What will you bring to that college? And my advice to you is many of you are going to apply to what I would call reach schools, schools where it's your lifetime dream to go to fill in the blank institution, right? Because it's a reach for you. What I'm going to advise you to do is think about including on your list of colleges a college where you're a reach for them. In other words, where basically they would love having a student like you, where you're at the top of their academic list. Why is that important? Because some of those colleges may put money on the table to entice you to come. So they may offer you a merit scholarship to try to convince you to attend. And maybe you don't take it, or maybe you do, right? So I know when my older daughter applied to colleges, she applied to 8 schools. She got in at 6 of them, declined by 2. One of the 2 she got declined by was Harvard, but she got into 6 colleges. And the 6 colleges she applied to, that she got into, all 6 of them put money on the table. Right? They gave her presidential scholarships or dean scholarships or things like that. That becomes really attractive if you're looking at an institution. So my advice to you is, as you're thinking about institutions, include on your list a school where you're going to be desirable, because that school may put some money on the table to make it possible for you. Okay, let's talk about the golden rule. You know the golden rule, which is that she who has the gold makes the rules. And what I mean by that is we're going to talk tonight about the way that we determine what you're eligible for, federal gold and the federal rules, and private colleges gold and their rules. I go into great detail on the blog in terms of how we determine your contribution, that expected family contribution we talked about. But I'm going to go in a little less detail on the presentation tonight, but give you some highlights. So first of all, think of this as kind of like a funnel. We take all the information you put on the FAFSA and we filter it down using a formula. And what comes out of that formula is that expected family contribution. It uses both parent information and student information if you're a dependent student. And let's talk about whether you're dependent or independent, right? So basically, the question of whether or not we need to have your parents' information is going to be determined on whether you can answer yes to any of these questions. If you can answer yes to any of these questions, you're considered independent and we don't need your parents' information. Otherwise, we need it. So to review that, right? If you're over 24 years of age, we don't need your parents' information. If you're working on a master's degree, if you're married or separated but not divorced, if you have kids of your own, if you have dependents that you provide more than half of their support, if you're an orphan or a ward of the court, in foster care, or emancipated minor, homeless or at risk of homelessness, active duty, or a veteran, if any of those are yes, you're what's considered an independent student. Otherwise, the federal government thinks you're a dependent student. Okay, so I know in many cases, some of you may have a unique situation. Let's say, this is a case that I actually worked with this year. Let's say you're in a situation where you don't know who your father is and your mother is incarcerated, right? What do you do in that situation? None of these rules that we talked about apply. So what happens in that situation? Let's say you're living with your grandparents and you haven't seen your parents in lots of years. In those situations, you can appeal to the college for what's called an independent override. If your situation is complicated or not, an unusual situation, you can talk to the college about making you independent. The process is you would fill out the FAFSA without parent information, and you would ask the college to allow you to be independent. That's going to be up to the individual college and based on the documentation you can provide. So if your situation is unique like that and you want to talk to me about it, I'm happy to. I would also recommend you read these 2 posts on the blog, because this talks a lot about how do you document that you're truly independent. Right? So again, I would highly suggest you take a look at this if you're in a unique situation. Okay. So for most of you, though, you're going to be in pretty typical situations with a parent, maybe one parent, maybe 2 parents, and then you as the student. So to talk about how this works, right, let's look at a couple of things in terms of how this plays out. So first of all, these are just general rules of thumb in terms of what goes into your contribution. And again, I talk a lot more about this on the blog. But generally, a couple of things you want to look at, and we're not going to spend too much time here, but I want to show you a couple of really important things. Number one, for many families, the single biggest asset they own is their home. FAFSA never asks you about your home. So on the FAFSA, no one's going to ask you for information about your home. No one's going to ask you for information about your retirement. Neither of those are assets that we include on the FAFSA or in figuring out your family contribution. We do include income and assets. You'll see that it's much more income heavy than it is asset heavy. And we give you an allowance based on the number in your family, the number in college, and the result we divide by the number in college. So let's pick on Pete for a second. So let's say Pete is going to have 3 kids of his own in college at the same time, right? And his contribution is $12,000. In that situation, right, 12,000 divided by 3, each student would have a $4,000 contribution because it's divided by the number in school. When I worked at MIT, I'll give you an example. We had a family who earned over $500,000 a year. That was their family earnings. But they had a set of quintuplets, 5 kids, all of whom were the same age, all going to college at the same time. So even though they had that large income, they qualified for financial aid because their contribution got divided by 5, because all 5 kids were going to college at the same time. So this is the way the system works, is it does look at how many in college you have going at the same time. Most importantly, though, is look at the difference between parent assets and student assets. And I just want to talk about that for a quick moment. If you've been saving money in your student's name, and by the way, my parents made 2 mistakes when we applied for financial aid for me. Number one, they missed the deadline. And we're going to talk about never miss the deadline in a moment. Never miss the deadline, right? If a school puts out a deadline, meet it. Number two, the other mistake my parents made is they saved money for college in my name. So when I applied for financial aid, it got included at a much higher rate, right? So think about this, and you'll see this on the slide here. Student assets are included at a 20% rate in your contribution. So if you have $10,000 that you've saved for college, if that money is in the student's name, about 2,000 of it would be part of that family contribution every year. If that money instead, the $10,000, was saved in the parent's name, right, about $300 to $600 of it would be part of every year's contribution. So you're in a much better place if that money is included in the parent's name. Question about 529s, things like the Florida prepaid program. Who's the owner of those? The owner is the parent, not the student. So if you have a prepaid plan, whoever bought the prepaid plan is the owner of that. It's not going to be the student. It's going to be you as a parent. So when you report the value, you're going to report it as your asset if you're asked to report assets. It's not the student's asset. So in those situations, again, it's in their name, not in the student's name. If both your names are on the account, then it looks at who is the person who pays taxes on the interest. Probably it's you as a parent. So it's at least worth looking at that. And again, the result here is that family contribution that's made by the combination of your parent contribution and your student contribution. So that was federal methodology. And again, we're not going to talk a great deal about this, but some schools have their own formula for their own money, right? And if you're applying to a place like MIT or Harvard or NYU, they may use what they call institutional methodology. And in those situations, they use their own method to determine your contribution. Often that will include home equity. So the CSS profile, if you're asked to fill it out, asks questions about your home because private colleges want to know that information when they give out their own funds. So generally, you'll see that if a school is asking for institutional methodology, it's because they're using funds of their own and they want to get a more complete picture of the family. So you're confused. This is a lot of information. You need an easy way to figure this out. I'm going to make this all much easier for you. And that is with something called the net price calculator. So every college in the nation is required to have one of these on their website. It's a requirement by the federal government for something called a net price calculator. What it does is it allows you to enter in information about your income, your assets, your family circumstance, and they give you an estimate of what your family contribution is and what your financial aid award would be. So in that situation, you can really quickly get a sense without having to wait for your FAFSA, wait for your financial aid award of what kind of financial aid you might be able to expect. So I've given you a list. This U.S. News and World Report page lists the net price calculators for the top 300 colleges in the country. But if you go to Google or go to the college's homepage, you can look for the words net price calculator, and you can find it on every college's page. And you can very quickly find out what your contribution would look like. Notice, by the way, this GI equals GO. What does that mean? That means garbage in equals garbage out. So your estimate is only going to be as good as the estimate you give. If you type in bad information, you're going to get a bad result. So you want to make sure that you put in the best and most accurate information you can. So a couple of questions that I've seen. FAFSA does include as an asset the amount of money you've saved in your bank accounts, your money market accounts, stock, etc. Does not include retirement, does not include 401k, but it does include cash, savings, checking accounts, etc. There was a question: if a parent wants to get a degree at the same time, does that affect how much the son can get in financial aid? So, interesting question. For the student, The parent cannot be included as someone in the household in college. You'll see that instruction on the FAFSA. So when you fill out the FAFSA, let's say it's 4 of you. It's mom, dad, son, and daughter. Son's going to college. You're doing son's FAFSA. And father also going to college. On the son's FAFSA, you'd have to list 4 in the family, 1 in college. But when it comes time to do dad's FAFSA, you can list 4 in the college, 4 in the family, 2 in college. So again, you'll see all of that. And again, it's income for both parents and students. There's a question from Mark about, I have a part-time job. Yes, as a student, you're going to enter your income from 2019, just like your parents are going to enter in their income from 2019. Okay. So once we determine your family contribution, how do you pay for it, right? What are the ways in which you can then pay for your contribution? And many families jump to loans. And I just want to remind you that there are lots of options for how to pay your family contribution. If you've made savings for college, like a Florida prepaid or something like that, obviously now's the time to use it. But don't forget, most colleges have payment plans. So for example, at Valencia, we have a program called the Tuition Installment Plan, where you can pay for your tuition over 4 or 5 months by semester. I know at Stetson, they have a 10-month payment plan. So rather than have to borrow all of what you might have to pay, you can make monthly payments month by month and not have to borrow as much. Some parents might wind up borrowing a parent loan. And if so, again, you just want to be careful not to borrow too much. But it's possible that as a parent, you may have to fund some of your contribution from a parent loan as well. Okay, so a couple of questions. Can you use scholarships first instead of using Florida prepaid? You can. A common misconception that people have is, and I want to talk about this for Florida prepaid and Bright Futures. People know that Florida prepaid and Bright Futures are based on the amount of your tuition, but they're not limited to paying only tuition. So for example, let's say you get Bright Futures and a tuition scholarship. The Bright Futures can be used at the college to pay for other things like books or supplies or room and board or other things if your tuition is covered by some other scholarship. Same with Florida prepaid. So again, it's based on your tuition amount, but it doesn't only have to be used to pay for tuition. Other questions? We do at Valencia offer a monthly payment plan, so you can do that as well at Valencia. Any extra scholarship money you qualify for can be used to pay for other pieces of your cost of attendance, like your books, your supplies, your room and board, other expenses as well. Okay, we're going to do something fun. So I want all of you to, and I can see some of you on video, so I'll know if you're doing this or not. Everyone fold your arms. Thank you, Barbara. I can see you folding your arms. I appreciate that. Look down for me now and see which wrist is in front. As you fold your arms, look down and see which wrist is in front or which wrist is showing, right? So here's a question for you. How many of you is it your left wrist? Show of hands if you're on video. If it's your left wrist, you're what's called a visual learner. So you're a person who processes information. Your preferred modality is looking at information, seeing it on screen. You want a copy of the PowerPoint. Chances are you're taking notes because notes is how you learn. You like to see the information you're learning as you're learning it. How many of you had your right wrist showing? By the way, the rest of you, if we're following along. Okay, you all are what are called auditory learners or oral learners. You prefer to process information by hearing it. So talk like it will drive you, because what I'm saying, I did that, by the way, on purpose. So yeah, auditory learners, oral learners, you love to hear information. You're probably passionate about music, but music, you can't listen to music and do anything else. By the way, this has nothing to do with handedness. I'm left wrist showing, but right-handed. It has nothing to do with that. If that doesn't work, if I didn't describe you well, then you're what's called a kinesthetic learner. You like to learn by doing. Your preferred modality is to jump in and actually just try something out. Okay, this is the most fun. Try to fold your arms the other way. Thank you to those of you on video, because I love watching you do this. Here's what you look like. Yeah, it hurts my brain. Yeah, okay, so feel how uncomfortable that feels. So this is kind of like forcing you to learn in a style that isn't comfortable for you. And what I'm going to do now is, for those of you that are visual learners, I'm going to show you an image to sort of start to wrap everything up. And we're going to finish in about 15 minutes, and then we're going to move to questions. And we'll take lots of questions and give lots of time for questions. But I want to move to this image for those of you that are visual learners, so you can see what I'm talking about. For those of you that are oral learners, I'm going to describe it. And for those of you who are kinesthetic, good luck. You're just going to have to get a job in financial aid to figure it out. Yeah, you'll have to just go ahead and do the FAFSA and go through the process. But here's what I want you to think. I want you to see, if you're a visual learner, in your mind, that in my financial aid office, I'm surrounded by barrels. And my job in my office, every barrel represents a student. And my job in my office is to fill up a barrel with coins. And let's say I work at a school where the barrel takes 25,000 coins. That's what I need to do to fill up the barrel, 25,000 coins. And once I fill up the barrel, I've paid for a year of college. So every barrel is a student. What is the first thing I'm going to put in that barrel? As I pour money into the barrel, the first thing I'm going to pour in is that family contribution, that EFC. So let's say in this example, the EFC is $5,000. But let's say the EFC was $25,000. Would that fill up the barrel? Yes. Could I give that family any financial aid? No, because that barrel would be filled. There is one exception. All of you will qualify for what's called a direct student loan. Even if there's no room in the barrel, even if you have no need, you can still qualify for a direct student loan. The student loan's about $3,500 your first year, $4,500 your second year, $5,500 your third and fourth year. That's a loan all of you can qualify for, even if you don't have need. The difference is, if there's room in the barrel, the government's going to pay the interest while you're in school. So when you borrow it on day one, and then you leave on 4 years later, if there was room in your barrel, the loan will be the same amount. $3,500 will still be $3,500. You get a 0% loan while you're in school. If there's no room in your barrel, then it's called unsubsidized. Then the interest is building, and you're going to have to choose to pay that either while you're in school or after. But everyone can qualify for that loan. Okay, so let's go back to our family. Our family has a $5,000 contribution. So there's lots of room. There's 20,000 coins that I need to put into that barrel. The next thing the college is generally going to put in is grant and scholarship money, what we call gift aid, money that does not have to be repaid. So in this situation, the student qualified for a $7,000 grant. Maybe that's the Pell Grant, a $6,800 scholarship from the school. Right? The next thing that's going to come in is what we call self-help. And in this case, you can see the student got a work award and a loan award, $1,200 work study, $3,500 direct loan. So in this family situation, there's room in the barrel, $1,500 of room in the barrel, right? But basically that makes up the $25,000. If there's room in the barrel, who has to fill up the rest of the barrel? Whose job is it? Yes, Cherry Vanilla Anderson, you are right on point. Yes, it is your job, right? So one of the things you want to ask is whether or not your college is a full barrel college. Don't ask that, they'll have no idea what you're talking about. What that means is, do they meet full need? Do they fill up your barrel? Do they meet your full need? And obviously you want a college to meet your full need. right? That is the best situation, but it necessarily won't be the case in every case. Yolandi, I'll come back to your question in a moment. If this student, for example, has an unmet need, but let's say they go out and get a scholarship for $1,500, the good news is that scholarship can go right into that room in that barrel. The college wouldn't have to take money away to fit a scholarship in. But let's look at this case. Let's say this student went out and got a $5,000 scholarship. What's going to happen? Right. The first $1,500 is going to be covered by that unmet need, but the next $3,500 of their scholarship is going to have to come from somewhere. Probably the college is going to take the loan money away first, or the work money, based on what your preference is, but something's got to give. So you can't take away the parent's contribution by getting a scholarship. And that's what I want to show you here, is notice that EFC is way on the bottom of the barrel. So before any savings would be for the parent by you as a student getting a scholarship, you have to replace all of the other money first. And that's not likely going to happen. So why get a scholarship? Two reasons. Number one, it will reduce how much you have to pay an unmet need. And number two, it can reduce your work and loan award. So important to look for scholarships. We're going to talk about scholarships in a moment. Yolanda, your question is mom head of household? So the answer is your situation sounds Pell eligible. You're going to have to file to figure out what the Pell amount would be. But your situation is something you would put on the FAFSA and you'd have the answer back as to what your contribution would be. Okay. So just some quick insider tips before we talk about scholarships. And most of this we've talked about before. I just want to highlight the first bullet here. Don't miss the deadline. If you forget everything else that I've told you tonight, don't forget those 4 words. Don't miss the deadline. Colleges have lots of money to give away, but they run out of money. And they prioritize people who make their deadlines. So if a college publishes a deadline for the application, make sure you get it there. Yes, by the way, Brad, Bright Futures does apply to private colleges as well as public colleges. If you have questions, ask them. As I said, you'll have my email address before the night is over. So if you have questions from me, you can feel free to email me questions. And make sure you think about all of your options. So tonight, we've talked really federal government, state government, college, university. We haven't really talked about these bottom 3, private agencies, professional associations, parent employers. They often can provide funds as well. And I want to talk about scholarships for a moment. So there is lots of money out there. In fact, one of the best places to look for scholarships is FastWeb, and I've listed them here. FastWeb gives away more than 1.5 million scholarships every year, with a total of $3.4 billion a year in funding. What you want to do is set up a profile, use a different email address so that you're not getting junk email, but set up a profile at FastWeb. And the important information to know here is many scholarships will have some kind of requirement for either an essay or maybe a video or something to do. The scholarships, those requirements, generally have less applicants. I did one of these presentations a couple of years ago, and a parent came up to me afterwards and said, you know what, my daughter, she applied for a scholarship from FastWeb. It was a $20,000 scholarship over 4 years, $5,000 a year, and she won it. And it was a scholarship. She had to write an essay about patriotism. And the daughter said, you know what, it was an okay essay, but it wasn't like the best thing I've ever written. So she contacted the scholarship company to find out why she was selected. And they said to her, you were the only person to write an essay. So again, keep in mind that lots of scholarship companies have money to give away, but you want to take a look at those programs that require some investment of time, and that investment of time may be worth the return on the other side. Don't forget, by the way, that schools may have their own scholarship program or application. So at Valencia, for example, we have a foundation scholarship system. I know UF and UCF and FSU have scholarships, etc., that they're able to provide. So don't forget those programs as well. But FAFSA is a good nationwide source for information. Okay, so quickly, I wanted to go through the calendar. What do you do when? So remember, October 1 is when the FAFSA and CSS profile are available. To have deadlines for FAFSA in November and December. If you want to get a jump on it, go ahead and get your application in now. As soon as October 1 starts, the system goes live. You can start doing your FAFSA on October 1st. Don't do it before then, but starting October 1st, you can go ahead and get it done. There's no reason to wait. But again, you'll see most colleges have their deadlines in November and December. Also, you want to pay attention to admissions deadlines. Remember, admissions office may have their own deadlines for admission. I'm focused really more on the financial aid calendar here, but just to keep in mind. Some schools have rolling financial aid or rolling admissions. So again, like for example, at Valencia, we suggest if you're looking for fall, that we provide you a deadline of not until April 1st. Before the fall semester begins, way after October 1. But you can go ahead and get your FAFSA done now. There's no harm in doing that, and go ahead and list Valencia on it as one of the schools you're interested in. CSS stands for College Scholarship Service. That's the name, the full name of that CSS financial aid profile. So if you Google it, you'll find it that way. It's also offered by the College Board. Generally, colleges will have their deadlines, anywhere from December to February is generally most colleges have their deadlines for forms. In February or March, schools might contact you if they have questions, and many schools will mail their decisions as late as the end of March or early April. Some will mail them earlier for early decision. I know, for example, UCF does rolling admissions. So it will depend on the individual school. But, generally by the end of March, early April, you'll have decisions from all of your institutions. In April is when you're comparing decisions and making a decision on your end. And most colleges abide by what they call the decision deadline or universal reply date of May 1st. May 1st is the time frame that you'll need to let colleges know, are you coming or not. Some colleges may ask you for a deposit. They may ask you to pay money, a small amount, to hold your spot for tuition, room, and board. June is when you get your bill for the fall semester. Usually that's due by August 1st or so. Don't forget that in October of your freshman year, right, the FAFSA and CSS profile will be available again. So you want to make sure that you do this every year. You apply every year for financial aid. And in November, December is when you get your bill for the spring semester and things start all over again. So what happens if you need more help after tonight? And we're going to come back to your individual questions in a moment. But what happens if you need more help after tonight? Where do you go? So here are a couple of places. So first of all, I want to point out FAFSA.ed.gov, where you find the FAFSA information. CSS Financial Aid Profile Online. There's also a great webpage called finaid.org that has a lot of good information about how it works. It's not maintained by the federal government, but it is a good private source of information about how we do our jobs in the financial aid world. You can find my blog at moneymanblog.com. You will not see my name anywhere on that blog. It's not a Valencia blog, not owned or supported by Valencia. It's an independent blog that just answers questions about financial aid throughout the whole system. So feel free to check that out as well. Obviously, every college's financial aid office will have a financial aid page as well. And you'll want to make sure to check their information out too. And don't forget your high school guidance office, right? Nicole is a great source of information, and her peers throughout the OCPS system are a wonderful, the career and college transition folks are a great source of information. and they can provide answers to many of your questions as well. Finally, I want to so we do an event at Valencia College in October every year that we call FAFSA Frenzy. And our theme is that paying for college doesn't have to be scary. And we will publish information. We haven't set our dates yet, but we can actually help you fill out the forms directly. We'll set up Zoom appointments with you and help you do the forms on a one-on-one basis. You'll see information about it on this webpage. It will be updated in the next week or so. Dates for 2020. So make sure to check out Valencia College's FAFSA Frenzy. You don't have to be coming to Valencia to participate in this program. So it is a free event that we offer for the community. And I promise you this
schools as well. Mm-hmm. Sorry. Yeah, most of your high schools as well will be hosting, most of our high schools as well will be hosting FAFSA help sessions. So make sure you keep on updated with all of your high school information. Every high school has a college and career specialist on campus every day. And every campus also has one of me, which is a college transition counselor that comes out once a week. So there's plenty of support at the high schools as well.
Great. And this is my email address, gbarkowitz@valenciacollege.edu. Please make me regret that I gave you my email address. So what I mean by that is, if you have questions, ask them. The best way that I know if this information helps you tonight is by the questions you ask me. So I will reply to your email if you have a particular question you want to ask. It is 8 o'clock. I wanted to get you done in about 90 minutes. So I want to live to that. But I do want to say that I am going to stay for a while, and I'm happy to turn to questions, and the people have questions they want to ask. So I'll try look through some of the ones that have been typed already. And if you need to go, thank you for joining us. A pleasure to have you with us tonight, and always happy to answer your questions moving forward. But let me try to answer some of the questions that I did see earlier. So one of them was about grandparents. If grandparents bought a 529 plan or bought the Florida prepaid, then it doesn't get reported on the FAFSA because it's owned by the grandparents. So again, in that situation, it's not something that the grandparents would report because they're not on the FAFSA specifically. Page of the financial aid calendar sheet. There we go. I appreciate all the thank you. So again, Jeremy asked, do I have to do both the FAFSA and the CSS or just the FAFSA? Jeremy, the answer is going to be dependent on the colleges you're applying to. You do have to do the FAFSA in every case, but not every college requires the FAFSA. Remember, only those colleges that are required to do the profile where you're asked specifically CSS financial aid profile. But we'll search now. Let's see if we can get there really quickly. You'll be able to see, once my Google response, a list of colleges that require the CSS profile. So for example, if I come look in here, and I know earlier someone had asked about Ringling. Is Ringling Brothers one of the schools that requires the CSS profile? Where you can see is check participating schools and scholarships. And if you click here, you'll see the schools that particularly require the CSS financial aid profile. So someone asked earlier about Ringling, right? If I go down the list, Ringling College of Art and Design in Florida has a no, a yes, and 2 no's. Well, what's the second column? The second column is for international students, right? So basically, for Ringling, it's only if you're an international student that they need it. So you want to look for your college. You want to see, is it required for domestic students? I can change this right now to Florida. And let's look, this is probably easier to see. So in Florida, there are 4 schools that use the CSS profile. Only the University of Miami and Stetson require it for domestic students. So again, otherwise, if you're going to any other college in the state of Florida, you wouldn't need it. But if, for example, we choose, let's say, Massachusetts, right, you'll see in Massachusetts that a number of schools require it. What do I see about all of these schools? all of these schools are private colleges that have a lot of their own money to offer to families, which is why they all require the CSS profile. So again, you can find this information out just by going to the College Board's website or doing a Google search on a CSS profile. If a school needs the profile, they also will need the FAFSA. So yes, you will need both. Okay, so a couple of questions that have come in. Anne asks, if a family's income has been affected due to COVID, we should fill out the FAFSA as usual, and then we should appeal. Is that correct? Yes, it is. So let me show you an example of how this would work out. And what I love about the ability to do this online is I can actually show you some of this right online. So we're going to go to the Valencia College page, and I'm going to go to the financial aid section. So in our financial aid section on Valencia College, there is a section about what happens after I apply. And under this section, we have a whole section about professional judgment, right? So in situations where you have lost your income or things have happened, and we give you examples of what that might look like, we also provide information about what kind of documentation we would want, how we have a request form we suggest you complete. So lots of information here. So to Anne's question, you would base your FAFSA, fill out your FAFSA based on the 2019 income, but then you would fill out a professional judgment request. Say, hey, things are changed now. How can I let you know that? And what information might you want? So what I would suggest is at the individual colleges, you list, right, or you look for the phrase professional judgment on their website, or you look for the phrase special circumstances. And one of those two will probably show up if you do a Google search within the financial aid pages for that college. Angie asks, I recently sold my house. I have money saved to buy a new one. Do I have to put that in the FAFSA? Yes, you do. But again, that would be another situation where you'd probably want to ask for professional judgment, right? So, same situation, one-time taxable income, there are situations where exactly like that, the college can make a professional judgment. Let's see, going back to some of these questions. If more than 12 colleges, what do I do? So FAFSA allows you to list your colleges, and then once you list them, you can actually go back and correct them. So let's say you run out of room on the FAFSA. So let's do it this way. How do I list more than 12 colleges? So what you'll do is you'll list the first 12 colleges, and I would suggest you go by date order. So find out, here we go. What are the date deadlines for those colleges? And put the ones with the earliest deadlines first. Once you do your initial FAFSA, you'll receive what's called a student aid report confirming what you put on the FAFSA. You can then log back in and change, add new colleges. You can do what's called a FAFSA correction. What's important to know about the FAFSA is when you fill out the FAFSA, we get a copy of it electronically. Once we have it, we have your record. So if you remove us and add another college, that's fine, because we already have your first record. So you can always go back and make those adjustments. Okay, let's see. Nicole, are you sending out a copy of the presentation to folks if they would like it?
I think it's going to be too long to actually send. I can try to put it into a YouTube link, but it's definitely going to the high school, so they're going to be able to post it. And
Great.
It's going to be on the district YouTube channel in a couple of days.
And what I will do is if you go to the blog, I'll make sure that I post a copy for download from the blog as well. So again, I'll do that in the next day or so. If you go to Moneyman blog, it'll be there for you.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I had a question. You mentioned the student had to enter their income as well as the parents, and I was wondering, will the students, temporary or summer job income affect how much they receive?
So first of all, I love your name. I'm just saying. So
Thank you.
yes. So the answer is possibly, but probably not. So let me talk about why. Okay. So first of all, income is included, but you're allowed a significant protection. So generally, if you don't earn more than like $6,000 or $7,000 a year, then it's not going to count. If you
Okay.
earned more than that, then the first $6,000 or $7,000 would be protected. Whatever you paid for taxes would be protected, and then only about half of what's left would be required as part of your contribution. So for most students, it's not going to matter because they won't have earned enough money to make that kind of a difference. It's there are some that might be true, but in most situations, it's not going to.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Of course. Dual enrollment. I want to talk about dual enrollment because I know there have been some questions about dual enrollment. Students who are dually enrolled don't qualify for financial aid. You have to have graduated high school to qualify for financial aid. Once you graduate high school, you then can apply using the FAFSA and doing all the rest of that. If you haven't finished your associate's degree or your degree, you need to go on. But while you're in high school, dual enrollment students cannot qualify for federal financial aid as well, because a requirement to get federal financial aid is that you have a high school diploma. So just an FYI for that. There's a question, I've seen a question a couple of times about Social Security income. Social Security income is only included if it's taxable and part of your adjusted gross income. If Social Security income is non-taxable, then you don't report it. Let's see. Someone wants to ask a question on the mic. I'm happy to do that if you want to do that. Let me just answer this one question about overseas. So someone asks about overseas income. If your income is earned overseas, you can still report it. When it comes time to verify, what we will ask for potentially is a wage statement from your employer, or if you're filing a tax form overseas, that tax form. But just because the income's earned overseas, it can still be reported as part of the system. For example, another question that I get often is the student might be a U.S. citizen, but their parents aren't. Let's say you've got a situation where the parents happen to be in the United States, student was born, but the parents are not U.S. citizens. The student can still apply using the FAFSA, and they'd still put their parents' information based on wherever they're earning their income. And that's how we would determine the financial aid. Pete wants to comment on dual enrollment. Please do, Pete, if you have things you want to say about dual enrollment.
Hi, I was wondering if I can ask a couple of questions that I wrote down through here.
Sure.
So that way it'd be easier to address them. So one thing I was really worried about is, because I know you have to include like information about your parents' contribution, but what if your parents aren't willing to support you financially and you're like completely on your own for it? What would happen in that case?
Yeah, Fabiola, great question. So let me address that. So first of all, remember that them filling out the FAFSA doesn't mean they're paying to support you. So I think in very many cases, parents get confused and somehow assume that if they fill out the FAFSA, that means they're obligated to pay for college. They're not. So filling out the FAFSA doesn't actually obligate a family to do anything. It just fills out FAFSA. So unwillingness, not being willing to fill out a FAFSA, is not a reason to be independent. So we still will require information from parents. Once we get the information, we can then talk with the student about how to pay for it on their own, but we do require parental information. If it's more complicated, your situation's more difficult, then let's take that offline, because sometimes, and I'm not assuming this about your situation, sometimes a parent being unwilling to fill out a form is related to other issues going on in the family. And that
And how would you address that later then?
So,
would it be like through email?
For example, if let's say the relationship is broken down students not living with their parents anymore. There's no contact between them. In those situations, that's where I talk about in the presentation. I'll go back to it. This concept of a dependency override. So in that situation, we would do, we talk with the family, see if I can get back there, or with the student about documenting their situation so that we can address if they're really independent, even though they don't technically qualify.
Okay. So I also wanted to ask, because you mentioned dual enrollment, and I've actually been doing dual enrollment full time, so I could get my AA by the time I graduate, and I'm a senior now.
Great.
So I can apply for FAFSA, right?
So yes, you can go ahead and apply now. You won't qualify for financial aid until you're graduated from high school though. So this year, if you finish your degree and you're going to qualify by getting both your AA degree and your high school diploma at the same time, go ahead and apply for next year. You'll start in hopefully your junior year in college, and yes, you can apply. But you get financial aid while you're a dual enrollment student. So some students think that because they're taking college classes, they would automatically qualify. Now, I know, Pedro, you wanted to say something about Bright Futures.
That is correct. That is correct. For dual enrolled students, you have to always remember that you are still a high school student taking college classes. So when it comes to filling out your Florida financial aid application, you are always considered a high school student first time in college, even though you are a dual enrolled student. So just remember that when it comes to the Florida financial aid application and the FAFSA as well for a majority of the cases.
Okay. And that would also apply then when I apply to colleges in general then? It'd be following that guideline. Okay. And considering trying to apply for the most financial aid opportunities possible, when would you recommend applying for most colleges?
So again, from a financial aid perspective, there's no harm in starting on October 1. And the fact, that we're doing this today is great because it gives you the opportunity to start looking at this now. October 1 is the application start date for students who are applying for next fall, right? So remember, right now, October 1, you can start applying for next fall. Colleges will let you know what their priority deadline is. So, for example, I'm going to make up a date, but let's say UF says their priority deadline is December 1. You absolutely want to get the FAFSA and everything done by December 1st if that's their priority deadline. You might say, what does that mean, priority deadline? Remember, there are some funds that are unlimited, like Pell Grant. If you qualify for Pell Grant, it doesn't matter when you apply, you're going to get it. But there are other funds that run out. And generally what happens is colleges give those away first come, first serve. So the sooner you are in line, the better. Now, that as long as you meet the priority deadline, right? Doesn't matter, you don't have to do it at midnight, 12:01 a.m. on October 1st versus, on October 3rd or October 21st. As long as you're before the deadline they've set, you're okay. I would advise, if you can, go ahead and get it done in October. And there's no harm, and this question came up earlier, right? List every college you think you might apply for admission to. Don't leave anyone out. Don't wait until you find out if you're accepted. Go ahead and list all of the colleges, because better to get that information in sooner rather than later.
Okay. Sorry for all the questions. It's just I wanted to get it all clear so I make no mistakes.
Yeah.
So one other thing that I was concerned about when including the parents' information and assets and all that. So for example, my mom remarried, my dad's never been around, and so basically everything is based on my stepdad's income. It's not my actual parent.
Yep.
So my mom doesn't work and things like that.
Yep.
So do I have to include my stepdad in all that, or is it just considered my mom?
Yeah, because he's the family you're living with. But again, remember, it's all about determining what you're eligible for Then we can talk about how you pay for it. But in terms of filling out the form, yes, you would.
Okay.
So I know other people have questions, Fabiola. Let's
Thank you.
No problem. Lillian, I think you asked if you could ask a question on Mike as well, and then I know Pete wanted to add one more thing, but go ahead, Lillian, ask your question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Can.
Okay, I didn't want to be rude and interrupt when you guys.
No, you're fine. You're fine. Go ahead.
So I noticed earlier that I think it was like the second slide when you guys were talking about the in-state stuff, that UF's in-state was a lot lower than Valencia's, and I think that just kind of was weird to me because Valencia is a community college and UF is a university. So
Yep.
I
Let
don't.
me yeah, great question. Thank you for asking it. Let me explain why that is, and I'll go back to that slide. So first of all, remember this is total cost of attendance. This is not tuition. So I want to be clear about this, right? UF is, I mean, to my point of view, they're probably not including what is a legitimate total of expenses a student might face, right? We've included all of the expenses we think a student might take in a year, but this is everything. This is not tuition only. This is room and board. This is transportation, books, supplies, everything. If you look at our tuition side by side, UF is going to be a lot more expensive than Valencia, right? It's about 3 times as expensive as Valencia. But what I'm showing you here is that total cost of attendance. That's everything, including books and supplies, room and board, everything. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was just confused about that. And
Yeah, no, it's a great point. And actually, the reason that we've used a higher number is because we want to give you as much financial aid as we can. Doesn't mean you're going to spend $17,000, right? I mean, at Valencia, if you just take classes, it's going to be no more than about $3,000 in tuition. And you're right, we don't have dorms, right? But the whole reason we give you that room and board is because we know that it's expensive to live in Orlando. It's expensive housing. It's expensive here, right? I would say what we know about UF is that the housing rates are a little different in Gainesville than they are in Orlando, for example.
yeah, I have 2 more questions if that's okay.
Please.
So what if after completing the FAFSA, we wanted to add more colleges? How would that work?
Okay. So again, once you get your student aid report, you can always log back in and add a college or replace a college. That's part of the process. You can log back into your record and make a correction.
Or should you just do it from the beginning?
Or should we just do it from the beginning?
I would go ahead and list every college right up front. There's no harm.
Oh, okay. And
The Valencia Foundation.
And for the Valencia Foundation, is it need-based or is it merit?
So both. There's some programs that are merit only. There's some programs that are need only, and there's some that are a combination. So that's true of every college. Colleges have lots of different programs they offer. So go ahead and fill out the application, and we'll try to match you with the program that fits your criteria.
Okay.
Pete, I know you wanted to add something as well.
Definitely. I definitely wanted to reiterate the point that you made. On October 1st is when both the FAFSA application and the state application, the Florida Financial Aid app, open up. And it is critical that you submit those as soon as possible and start that financial aid process. Even though when you submit the Florida Financial Aid application, you might not have obtained the GPA, you might not have done the community service hours, you may not have taken the test. That is just one of the requirements, submitting that application. So if you do it on October 1st or shortly thereafter, that requirement has been met. You still have until high school graduation for the classes that you take, the GPA that you receive, and the service hours. You have until June 30th. But that online application, as long as you complete it, you can always come back and change the school codes on our application as well. But we reiterate that over and over to a lot of the parents, a lot of the students, to try to get them to complete that application as soon as possible. Because once it's completed, that requirement has been fulfilled, and you don't have to worry about that. You have to worry about the other requirements at the allocated time. Thank you.
So, Pete, there was a question. I don't know if you saw in the chat. If someone's Bright Future qualified and they decide to postpone a year because of the pandemic, or take a year and do like a gap year, what's the policy on that?
Correct. As we currently stand for Bright Futures eligibility, if a student meets all the requirements by high school graduation and submits their actual online application, they have 5 years to utilize the Florida Bright Future Scholarship from the graduation date. Now, if they elect to take that year off, that means that they only have 4 remaining years to submit and utilize their Florida Bright Future Scholarship to obtain their actual degree.
Thank you for that, Pete. So again, if you need to take a year, you can, but just be aware that it cuts into your 5 years available. Yeah, very
Overall availability, correct.
Yep, great. So by the way, so Raquel asked a question about another kind of financial aid like Bright Futures. Remember, Bright Futures does have various versions. There's Florida Academic, Florida Medallion, based on different SAT score levels. You might qualify for other pieces as well. Again, there are lots of private scholarships that you might be able to qualify for as well. If you graduate with your AA, can Bright Futures apply toward a master's? So it is true, I think, that, again, it depends on if you can do your bachelor's in less than 4 years, there's a potential that you might be able to use some of your Bright Futures to help pay for your graduate school. But again, it's got to be within those first 4 years. Yeah.
Correct. And that's when it will pay for your first year of graduate school at the undergraduate level.
So Dorian, you asked a question about your parent not filing a tax return. Can you tell me more, if you can unmute, what's going on with their 2019 taxes?
Hi, my mom, she said she just didn't file for taxes.
Okay, so if she is required to file, then she will need to file before you do your FAFSA, or you can estimate, but you will need to file ultimately, because otherwise you'll be selected for verification, and we have to prove out that information. So my suggestion is, if she's just late, hasn't done it yet, go ahead and do that as soon as possible, because it's important. So Lillian asks, there is a separate question for the Valencia Foundation, a separate application. I can show you that. So again, if you go on the Valencia page, if you just go to valenciacollege.edu/scholarships, that will take you to our website. We do a couple of things here at Valencia. So first of all, we run a scholarship bulletin board where if we're notified about scholarships, we list them. So you can see that we have a whole bunch of scholarships. These are not limited to Valencia, so anyone's welcome to come and look at these. These are private foundations and organizations that let us know about scholarships. So we keep information here about how much it is, what the deadline is, etc. We also have up top here the Valencia Foundation, and if you apply, you can actually apply right now. So the scholarship application is always live, and you can go ahead and do it as soon as you're ready. You need to have a login. You only get a login after you apply for admission. So that's important to know. Pedro, go ahead.
Yes, I saw a question in regards to the Bright Future 100% and what it covers. There are, as Daniel explained, 3 levels of the Florida Bright Future Scholarship: the Florida Academic and the Florida Medallion. The top level pays 100% of tuition and fees at a state college or state university, with an additional $300 education voucher for both fall and spring. The Florida Medallion pays 75% of tuition and fees at a state college, state university, with no educational voucher, and they all cover summer. However, and this is a very good part, as Daniel will say for his school, if you are now this year's graduate, a graduate for 2020-21, and you enrolled in 22, if you are a Florida Medallion student enrolling at a state college, the Florida Bright Futures will now pay 100% of tuition and fees at a state college. So for both the Florida Academic and the Florida Medallion are going to pay 100% of tuition and applicable fees at a state college, that means, or what used to be called a community college, such as Valencia.
Absolutely. I've shown my email address. Someone's typed it in the chat. Thank you, Kathleen Kim. Rachel, again, reminder, don't wait till you're accepted to apply for financial aid. Go ahead and do it now. Apply now. So get your application done. So Dorian, if you want to reach out to me by email, we can be in touch about best ways to be in touch with each other. I don't generally release my phone number, especially because I'm not in my office, so I'm not usually on the phone these days. I spend most of my time on Zoom. For dependency override, Fabiola, you do that with the individual colleges. So each college will make its own decision. There is no uniform website. That would have to be done with each individual college. Wendy, as a junior, you can go ahead and get your FSA ID now if you want to. I would start doing research on the net price calculator. I would start doing some researching about scholarship information. But otherwise, that's really what you should be doing in total. You know, you could go ahead and at least get some information about, based on the net price calculator, what might be the chances of your qualifying for aid at particular institutions. So mañana, as I hear Espanol, mañana, just a reminder that we are doing this in Espanol mañana. So if you prefer Spanish language, we have one of my colleagues, Melissa Alicea, who is going to host a session for tomorrow evening, por todos que quieren la lengua español. So if you prefer to hear in Spanish, we'll do that tomorrow night. You can tell my Spanish is not as wonderful as hers will be, so she'll be much better able to answer. So we're going to try to wrap to close because we're right at about 2 hours. Nicole, anything you want to add, either about tomorrow or about anything else that you want to add as we close down?
We have the PowerPoint translated in Spanish and Haitian Creole and Portuguese. So if anybody would prefer any of those, you could let us know as well, and I can send you the PowerPoint in a different language. For another time, it will be posted on the district YouTube channel in a couple of days, as well as we will get it out to the schools and they will be posting it as well. Okay,
Great.
So thank you so much, Daniel, and a great surprise having Mr. Pedro Hernandez on with us as well from the state. We were actually talking back and forth about maybe doing a Florida financial aid application separate webinar so that we can get those questions answered as well. So again, Daniel is free for all of the questions that you have if you want to email him, as well as any college and career specialist on your high school campuses or college transition counselor that you may need. Okay.
Thank you all so much for joining us. This was a great experiment. Nicole, thanks for facilitating this. And I know we're going to try to schedule one again in the month of October. So if you have friends or family or colleagues or enemies that you want to force to sit through a 2-hour presentation on financial aid, we encourage you to do that as well. So thank you all very, very much. Have a great evening and good luck with your financial aid application process.
Thank you.